because that's really what's going to make a difference. And today we're really all one family here. And just to take us back to the beginning now for a second, I'd like to welcome, because there's a lot more people, I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. It really is an amazing turnout. And this meeting is being sponsored by 3 groups tonight: the Wilderness Committee, the Tanker Free BC, and the Point Grey Foreshore Protection Society. And I'm Mel Lehan, and I'm here on behalf of the Point Grey Foreshore Protection Society. And you're going to be hearing a lot of important words tonight, but we're also here because we need to have our souls and cultural side fulfilled too. So we're going to hear some wise words in another way from some friends of ours, the Raging Grannies.
Very quickly, we're honored to be here. We would have probably come individually anyway to provide support to this evening, but thanks to Mel's giving us permission to come and sing. We know we're singing to the converted. We like our songs. The first one, I believe, was written by Barb Siegfried, the second to my right. So she wrote the song in July. And so that's how new it is. We have 2 songs, and we feel very strongly about the message that we are going to be singing. Does somebody want to hold this? I've got the worst voice. I don't want to sing. I do not. I have the worst voice. I can talk, but singing is not what I do. We have 2 songs, and so Barbara is going to head us off.
Everyone knows oil and water don't mix. When there's an oil spill, there is no quick fix. The obvious conclusion is first and foremost to keep those crude dudes away from our coast. Our beautiful harbor has an oil port, a potential catastrophe we should abort. Without any discussion or decent process, Kinder Morgan's arrival risks a black mess. From 2 tenders a week, soon they will plant 10. Did anyone ask us? We would have said ban. When we've seen ecosystems ruined by our slicks, oil and water don't mix. Join us and say nix. When grandmothers squawk, we do much more than talk, 'cause there's so much work to be done. There's a question of health versus oil tankers' wealth, while the tar sands pollute with every ton. Our leaders, of course, show no shame or remorse, while enjoying the profits from oil. So we'll bitch, rage, and roar even more, 'cause our future is not theirs to spoil. They think that the tar sands are good for trade, but they mention the damage at all. It will look pretty They must work on behalf of us all. So we'll bitch, rage, and roar even more until corporate greed takes a fall.
Let's hear it for the raging Grannies. With the Grannies on our side, is it possible for us to lose? I don't think so. There's a lot of strength, power, and wisdom all wrapped up in some beautiful song and some great words. Now, I'd just like to introduce, we have a few special guests here tonight. It's always nice to have elected politicians, people who are serving their community, coming to listen and to learn and to speak. So I'd like to first of all welcome Joyce Murray, who's the MP, Member of Parliament for Quadra. Joyce, there she is. And over to my left, and Constance, you're welcome up on the stage. Constance Barnes, who is Commissioner on the Park Board. And Constance will be speaking later on behalf of the Park Board. And we also have in the audience former City Councillor Fred Bass, who's been a long-time fighter for all forms of justice. And now, what we're doing is we're having a spokesperson from each of the three groups who sponsored this meeting. And the person who's going to be speaking next is for the Wilderness Committee, and it's Ben West. And I'd just like to tell you a bit about him. If you don't know about Ben before tonight, you'll sure know about him after, but I'm sure you see him everywhere. He's just indefatigable. I don't know if I said that word right, but you know what I mean. As the Healthy Communities campaigner for the Wilderness Committee, Ben is responsible for organizing grassroots campaigns related to fighting climate change and reducing toxic pollution. And boy, that's what this is. He spends most of his time these days trying to stop oil tankers from exporting heavy crude oil through the BC coast. In all his work, Ben is driven by his passion for environmental justice and ecological literacy. And in his spare time, Ben's a videographer, juggler, Twitter addict, and a wannabe stand-up comedian. Maybe he can do all of it at the same time. Who knows? Let's give it a try. Ben?
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all here. How's everybody doing? It's a little warm in here. I was going to try to make some sort of joke about hot air from the government in their announcement yesterday, but I couldn't think of any, so if you just laugh anyway, that'd be helpful. Thank you. All right. I was told you're supposed to make people laugh at the beginning of any presentation, so now that that's done. I've got a lot of slides to go through, so I'm going to try to get through them relatively quickly, and hopefully I'll have time for question and answer, because there's a lot to talk about today. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Y'all ready? Okay, so I'm going to try to just give you a sort of a general overview of the Kinder Morgan pipeline issue. And just for starters, what you see on the first slide here is our latest publication, Want to Help Stop an Oil Spill. Anecdotally speaking, I can tell you that we went through about 50,000 copies of that in about 2 months, which is almost unheard of for us. We go through a lot of publications that get far and wide, but for so many people to have such interest and for so many of these to be distributed so quickly is pretty unheard of. In fact, I know there's a number of people in this community who asked us for hundreds or thousands of copies, probably some people in this audience today, who took these papers and then distributed them door to door. And I can tell you even some people told us that they showed up at a door and there was already a newspaper there. So it might just be anecdotal evidence, but it tells you how interested in this issue the people of BC are, and in particular folks in this neighborhood. So I'm just going to dive right into it. First slide here is a reference to the Kalamazoo River spill, and probably everybody here has heard about this recently because it's been all over the news. When I was reading through the reports, the first thing that struck me that I hadn't really thought much about it was the smell. When there's a big oil spill, it smells awful, especially a spill of this diluted bitumen, the stuff that we're moving through the Trans Mountain pipeline, the Kinder Morgan pipeline today, and what the proposed expansion is all about. It's a smell that's been described as rotten eggs. It's nauseating. It makes you feel ill. And the guy you see in the picture here, whose name's John LaForge, he was one of the families who was the closest to this pipeline rupture. And the smell was so bad that within hours of it taking place, him and his family left their home, and they didn't even lock the door because they couldn't even imagine somebody coming and getting into their house. Because who would want to go there? And and weeks later they came back, and I should say they've never actually returned to their home. They've vacated their home permanently, as have about, I think, 300 other families. What they said was that when they went back to their house to go claim some of their most treasured possessions, their kid's favorite blanket, the clothes you wore to your wedding, that sort of thing, the smell of this bitumen from this relatively small spill, as far as oil spills go, was so rancid still that it was embedded in all of their most precious possessions, and they basically left everything behind, as if there'd been a hurricane or some sort of natural disaster. But of course, what it was something very different. It was an oil spill. All of that was caused by this little crack. What you're seeing there on that image, I don't know how well you can all see it, but that's the size of the hole that was in that pipeline that caused all that problem. It was relatively small. It was an old rusty pipeline, much like the existing Trans Mountain pipeline. At first, when the spill happened, the company, it was Enbridge, they thought they had a bubble, an air bubble in their pipeline. And what they did is they actually increased the pressure to try to push the air bubble through. So after there was already a hole in the pipeline, they actually increased the pressure and continued to pump more and more oil out of it. It tells us a little bit about how difficult it actually is to know what's going on. And the first line of defense was people like you and me. It was those folks in Kalamazoo, John LaForge that you just saw there. It's hard to even know that there's a spill happening until somebody smells something awful, until somebody experiences something terrible. And I can tell you that the smell went really, really far. In fact, my rough estimation is that if there was a spill in Burrard Inlet, you could probably smell it from the Premier's office on 4th Avenue. If you look at sort of the distance that smell went in Kalamazoo, it was comparable distance. And it might seem like a trivial thing, when we're talking about climate change and we're talking about the health impacts of, things like benzene in the natural environment. But I bring it up because, at a very real level, for you and me experiencing our day-to-day lives in our community, the smell would be one of the first things that any of us would notice if a spill like this happened. And it's an awful smell, and it's something that I hope we never experience. But unfortunately, what we're facing right now is a risk that we're going to actually see substantially more traffic through our inlet. The big difference, which is important for us to recognize between, what happened in Kalamazoo and what we've been doing for, decades, before that, was that we were dealing with this diluted bitumen. And if our politicians, if our elected officials had really been paying close attention to the Kalamazoo River spill, the real takeaway was this is a different kind of oil with very different kinds of consequences and much more difficult to clean up. The Environmental Protection Agency said clearly that they were unprepared to deal with this kind of a spill. And what I think we heard from our government yesterday was that they picked up on the fact that it was bad PR when there was an oil spill, but they definitely didn't learn the lesson that we're dealing with a different kind of oil, because nothing in the conditions that were laid out by our Premier yesterday, and maybe we can get more into this in the question and answer, nothing in those 5 points that was laid out by our Premier or anything else that's been said by our government has really recognized that we're dealing with this very different kind of oil. And if you want to know more about it, I really suggest checking out this news story from the Tyee. Spill from Hell was the subject line. And basically the major difference is this. You're moving much heavier oil through these pipes, much heavier than was ever intended to move through these pipes. And that tar sands oil, that bitumen, needs to be blended with toxins so that you're actually able to pump it through a pipe. So you've got now these very nasty toxins, things like benzene, blended in with bitumen. And when that ends up in the water, what happens is the toxins evaporate. So you now have benzenes in the air that you're all breathing in, which is extremely harmful to human health. And at the same time, now the heavy oil sinks to the bottom in the form of tar balls. And that was really the lesson to be learned from the Kalamazoo spill, was that it was a very different kind of oil, had some even more serious consequences than what we're used to with traditional crude oil. And this is what is really at the heart of what we're talking about. So I'm using up too much time already per slide. I can just tell by looking at Mel. So I'm going to try to go quicker. So for many of us, the first time we heard about the Trans Mountain Pipeline was in 2007. Everybody remember this? 30-foot geyser lasted about 12 minutes. It was probably the most dramatic sort of oil spill incident in the history of our province. And it was relatively small. But of course, if you're one of the people who lived in the area that looked like this, can everybody see that? I mean, that was the the result of a very small spill. But it was a striking thing, and it would, it actually did result in some of that oil ending up in the inlet. There's still tar balls washing up on the beach. And one of the most interesting things, my good friend Rueben over there has told me this story, that after the spill happened, when they were looking for where the oil was, a lot of the First Nations elders actually had a much better idea than the company did where to go find the oil, because they know that inlet inside and out. And I thought that was an interesting little reminder of, no matter how smart we think we are, no matter how much sort of scientific expertise we have, you really can't compare that with the kind of wisdom that comes with, centuries of living in a place and understanding the importance of that place. So I thought there was an important lesson to be learned from that. But this, for many of us, was the first time we became aware of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. This pipeline was built in 1952, became operational in 1953. It's about where 90% of the oil that we use comes from. We used to have 4 refineries on Burrard Inlet. Now we're down to just 1 operational refinery. So there's about 20 tankers a year that go down to California and refine oil, bring it back here for our consumption. But Kinder Morgan has been transforming this pipeline from something that's largely been focused on our own oil consumption to an export pipeline, and I'll get into that in a bit. It's important to remember, though, that that pipeline spills are not a rarity. In fact, they happen on a very regular occurrence. What you're looking at here is the number of oil spills listed by the National Energy Board between 2000 and 2009. And what you'll see there is that there was about 400 spills in that time frame. Different sizes, some big, some small. But oil spills are part of the business. In fact, even without a major incident, there's what the industry calls normal spillage. Over a period of time, there's an expectation that about a tablespoon is spilled for every kilometer of pipe for every barrel of oil. So when you add it up for a pipeline like the Enbridge pipeline or the Kinder Morgan pipeline, it works out to about a rough estimate, about 800 barrels of oil annually spilled. And little bits and pieces all over the place, but it's a lot of oil. So spilling oil into ecosystems is just part of the business. Just for reference point, most of you are probably familiar with that red line at the top. That's the Enbridge pipeline proposal. And of course, the purple line is the existing Trans Mountain pipeline. It now ships about 300,000 barrels a day. Of that, about 50 to 75,000 barrels is actually being exported on tankers. The remainder is split between our local refinery, the Chevron refinery on the inlet. About 100,000 barrels goes to the airport as jet fuel, and then about 100,000 barrels goes down to Washington State to the 2 refineries there for their consumption. We've seen already an increase in export and a reduction in local refining. And ultimately, this could even result in increased gas prices. If we go further down this road and refine less and less oil here locally, it's kind of contrary to what may seem like the obvious thing. And you'd think, of course, if we're importing more oil to British Columbia, we'll probably have it for our own consumption. But the truth is that actually, as we've increased the amount of oil going through that pipeline, Kinder Morgan's gotten permission from the National Energy Board to reduce the amount that's being refined locally, and we're actually bringing in more and more of it in trucks, believe it or not. So I think this graphic's important, though, because it's a reminder of, first of all, how much oil there is in the oil sands. And it's been pointed out that if we're ever going to face the challenge of climate change, that we need to, take less of that, not more. And the stated plan of our government is to triple the amount that we're extracting in the next 10 years. Either one of these pipelines would increase extraction by about 30%. But what's in between the oil sands and that coast? Well, it's you and me. We're the last line of defense, and one of the biggest fights against climate change of our generation. And I think they've actually picked the wrong place to try to do this. I mean, this is the birthplace of David Suzuki, of Greenpeace, of the Wilderness Committee, of Adbusters. Mel's here. So it's almost poetic justice that they have to go through this place, which really is the heart and soul of activism in our continent, I think. That we're the ones who are standing in between the expansion of the oil sands and reaching those markets in the Asia-Pacific region. So I'm going to give you a couple of tools, for these conversations, because really the point of this is to get you all fired up to get involved in this campaign. What you're looking at there is a double-hulled tanker. one of the number one arguments from the industry is, well, you know, the Exxon Valdez, sure, that was awful, but that was a single-hulled tanker. We've got all these double-hulled tankers. Well, guess what? Double-hulled tankers are not impenetrable. You can have a spill with a double-hulled tanker. That was a tanker in Japan just a couple of years ago. If you Google search double-hulled tanker spill, you'll find tons of images like this. You know, this is just one example. So point number one, double-hulled tankers will not save us. In terms of the size of these tankers, just so you can picture them, I thought it would be useful to compare the existing tankers in our inlet to the biggest buildings in our city. The smaller tankers are about 150 meters, which is about the same size as the wall center, which you see on the left here. And the bigger tankers, the biggest ones in our inlet right now, are about 250 to 300 meters. So for comparison's sake, the Shangri-La Tower, the biggest building in Vancouver, is about 200 meters tall. So they're bigger than the biggest building in the city. If you took the biggest building in the city, turned it on its side, and then navigated it through our inlet, that's what we're talking about moving through our inlet on a regular basis. This is my only slide with a bunch of numbers in it, but it's important. This just gives you a picture of what Kinder Morgan's been up to. So we had 22 tankers in the inlet in 2005 when they bought the pipeline. Like I said, up until around that time, it was largely a pipeline that was used for local consumption. There was a little blip during the 70s when we saw an increase during the oil shock, but when Reagan came in, that basically changed. Also, there was a couple of small spills in the inlet in the mid-70s, which I think probably had something to do with why we stopped exporting so much oil. So in 2008, Kinder Morgan actually got a permission to expand by about 50,000 barrels a day. And we've seen an increase by about 50,000 barrels a day. And what that resulted in was that by 2010, we saw 82 tankers in Burrard Inlet. It's worth pointing out that each one of these tankers is carrying about 3 times as much as was spilled by the Exxon Valdez. So if you're worried about an oil spill, comparable in size to the Valdez, each one of these tankers has the possibility of doing that. And now what Kinder Morgan has proposed is they want to build a new pipeline, and I'm not calling it a twinning or an expansion, and I urge you not to do the same either, because they're basically predicating their proposal on the fact that they bought an existing pipeline route. Kinder Morgan's a very smart company, and they know what's necessary to get a pipeline approved. And what they've done is they've bought an existing pipeline because they think it's going to help them get this pipeline built. But the reality is that just because they bought a pipeline doesn't mean they've got permission to build a new one. And we need to make that really loud and clear. So what they want to do is they want to build a new pipeline about 450,000 barrels a day, and all for the sake of export. And that would result in somewhere between 300 and 400 tankers a year in the inlet. Part of that is a condition of whether there's increased dredging of the inlet, which, by the way, would mean more dredged up sediment being dumped right off of your beaches over here. But that's maybe a topic we can talk about a bit more in the question and answer period. But the end result would be something like 300 to 400 tankers a year. And it's worth pointing out that Rueben Allen, the economist, has shown that the absolute capacity of the pipeline might actually be more like 1.1 million barrels when you look at the storage capacity and pumping capacity. This is just what Kinder Morgan is suggesting that they plan to do, but that doesn't mean that that's actually the ultimate capacity of the pipeline. So I put a picture of this beautiful orca that showed up just off Jericho Beach recently, just as a reminder of the fact that we kind of got to pick sides. Do you want to be on the side of the orcas, or you want to be on the side of big oil? I, for one, want to be on Team Orca. I don't know about you guys. Who's with me? Okay. I think this guy just kind of showed up to remind us that they were out there. And it's important for us to remember that. So often when we talk about the Enbridge pipeline, one of the number one things I hear people say is, well, maybe the Kinder Morgan pipeline's a better option. At least it's not in, these intact wilderness areas. And you know what? Both these pipelines are horrible ideas. A spill from either one of these pipelines would be totally devastating. Either one could pollute the Fraser River. Either one of them could, pollute our coast all up and down the coast. And a big enough spill would affect everybody on the coast. But at the end of the day, this isn't a sacrifice zone that we live in here. There's actually a lot of life and a lot at stake, and I'm sure you're going to hear more from Dave about some of the local specific concerns. But it's important for us to remember that this is an area that's teeming with life. As a kid who grew up largely in Toronto, this does not feel like a sacrifice zone to me. This feels like an environmental wonderland. So we might have a lot of people living here, but it's definitely not something that we can just sacrifice. So I've got about 2 minutes, and I'm going to try to give you a couple of alternatives too, because I think this is one of the critical pieces is that you're going to talk to a lot of people, and they're going to say, yeah, but we all drive cars. How are we going to get off this oil? And of course, this is about export. It's not about our local consumption, but we do have a role to play in terms of our local consumption. And we've got a petition outside called Transit Not Tankers, which I think kind of gets to the heart of this. So just for a little context, the International Energy Agency points out that the next 5 years, the decisions we make around infrastructure will set our course for the next 20, 30 years. And if we're serious about reaching greenhouse gas reduction targets, those are, the decisions we make now will set our course for the future. We can't wait till 25 years from now to try to reach a goal 30 years in the future, especially because a lot of our infrastructure is old and is at the point where it either needs to be replaced or upgraded or changed to something completely new. And of course, these pipelines are the quintessential example of that. But another piece of it is actually our land use and transportation planning. And we're lucky enough to have a great land use and transportation planner named Patrick Condon from UBC, who's written a book called 7 Rules for Sustainable Communities, Design Strategies for a Post-Carbon World. And in that book, he goes in detail into talking about how we can reduce our demand for oil by changing the way that we build our cities and changing the way that we get around. And he used Metro Vancouver as a case study. So, it's actually a great resource. I urge you to check it out. Just as one example, he looked at the Portman Bridge, which, by the way, we're going to have a contest to try to determine how long it'll be before it reaches consumption again, or congestion again. The only question is it 6 months or 5 years before that thing's a parking lot again? We spent billions of dollars on it. So if you guess the right length of time, you'll win a free bus pass. Thank you. But I put out, thank you. I knew I'd say something funny sooner or later. All right, so the Portman Bridge, point being, it cost about what, $3 billion? For the same amount of money, in fact less, you could cover all of downtown Vancouver in streetcars, generate way, way more jobs, and actually get people around a lot easier and get them out of their cars. You could apply the same map to the south of Fraser region, which frankly needs the investment significantly more than we do, and is where millions of people are expected to move in the next couple of decades. But that being said, it's just kind of a reminder of all these investment decisions we make, like building new bridges. There are alternatives that have other kinds of implications in terms of pollution, in terms of greenhouse gases, but also in terms of our demand for oil. So a couple specific examples. What you see there in the blue is the old interurban rail line, the rail line that first brought electricity to the Fraser Valley and actually moved people until about 1952, around the same time that the pipeline was built. And right around the same time we were ripping up streetcar tracks, we stopped moving people along that rail line. And now primarily it moves coal. What you see in the yellow is Highway 1, which is also in the midst of being expanded drastically. In this region, as you can see, the blue line goes right through Surrey, Langley, Abbotsford, Chilliwack. The reason why that happens is because when you build infrastructure like this, cities build up around it, and that's what happened. These cities all built around the interurban rail line, which means if you brought back passenger rail along that corridor, it would match up perfectly with the downtown cores of all these major cities. The cost of actually making that fully operational, high speed and convenient, with overpasses along all the major intersections is about a third of that bridge, would generate lots and lots of jobs, and is extremely popular. About 80% of the people when surveyed in that region support it. So this is one practical example of something we could do. It's a real win-win kind of solution, and it would actually generate jobs, be good for the environment. It's just good all around. And I'm out of time, Mel tells me, so this is my last slide. This is the highest per kilometer greenhouse gas corridor in Canada. This is the corridor between Toronto, well actually really Detroit and Quebec City. And the reason why it's such a high pollution, high greenhouse gas corridor is because it's the area where there's the most short-haul flights. It's also the most densely populated region. And of course, with air travel, the takeoff is the most carbon-intensive, pollution-intensive part of the trip. So when you're flying short-haul, that means you've got the most pollution, the most greenhouse gases per kilometer. There's an existing rail corridor, which is operational but is not high speed. If you turn that into a high-speed rail corridor, you could get a lot of people out of planes, you could get a lot of people out of their cars, and get people from point A to point B a lot faster. The other benefit of that, of course, is that there's a lot of out-of-work auto workers in Ontario who could really use something to do. Building trains would be a perfect thing to get a lot of people back to work and really move us in the right direction. So, I just wanted to put a couple of practical examples on the table. This really isn't just a question of, consuming less oil. There's things that we need to do that tangibly, that, in terms of investment, in terms of infrastructure, that can move us in the right direction. So I do urge you to check out our Transit Not Tankers petition, and I'm sure you probably have all kinds of questions and comments, which hopefully we can get to at the end if I ever stop talking. So I think I'm done now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, he did talk a wee bit over time, but boy, did he teach us a lot. If you've got an organization and you want to learn something about it, you couldn't get a better person to come and speak to you, because he knows so much. He's invested so much of his time and energy, and we're so lucky to have him on this issue fighting for us.